My name is Daniel. I am a student. This is a true story from my school life. It happened on an exam day. I still remember it very clearly. It taught me a lesson I will never forget. Let's begin. Chapter 1: The Exam Morning Nerves. I woke up early, very early. It was still dark outside. My alarm rang at 5:30 a.m. I jumped out of bed. My heart was already beating fast. Not because I was late, but because I was nervous. It was my final exam in English. It was important to me. I went to the bathroom, washed my face, brushed my teeth, and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked tired. I had studied late last night. I had read every chapter. I had memorized every answer, but still, I did not feel ready. I put on my school uniform. I wore my lucky white shirt. It had a small blue pen mark on the sleeve. I didn't care. I always wore it on exam days. I believed it brought me good luck. I packed my bag slowly, very carefully. I took my admit card, my hall ticket, 2 pens, a pencil, an eraser, and my ruler. Then I zipped my bag and opened it again. I checked everything. Then I checked again. I even clicked both pens to be sure they were working. Click. Click. Yes, both worked. My mother came into the room. She smiled and said, "Good morning, Daniel. You will do great today." I nodded but didn't say anything. I was too busy thinking about the exam. She handed me a cup of tea and a plate with 2 slices of bread. I took small bites. I couldn't eat much. After breakfast, I picked up my bag, wore my shoes, and stood at the door. It was still early. The sun was just coming up. The sky looked orange and peaceful. But I didn't feel peaceful at all. My father came to the door. He handed me a black ink pen. "It's new," he said. "Keep it as backup." I smiled. Now I had 3 pens. I felt more prepared. He placed his hand on my head and said, "Be calm, Daniel. Just write what you know, do your best." I nodded. I stepped out of the house. The cool breeze touched my face. It felt nice. I walked slowly. My school was not far, just 10 minutes from my home. As I walked, I saw other students too. Some were walking fast. Some were talking loudly. Some were silent like me. Everyone looked tense. A boy behind me was reading from his notebook while walking. He almost bumped into a pole. His friend laughed. I smiled a little. But my hands were still cold. Chapter 2: Entering the Hall with Hope. I reached the school gate. It looked the same as always, but it felt different. There was a big board outside that said, "Final exam, silence please." The watchman checked my admit card and let me in. I walked to the exam hall. Room number 14. My roll number was written on the board. Outside the room, I walked in. The room was quiet, too quiet. Only the sound of chairs moving, bags zipping, and nervous sighs could be heard. I found my seat. It was in the 3rd row by the window. The desk was clean. The chair was a little shaky, but I didn't mind. I sat down, took out my pens, and placed them neatly on the desk. I looked around. Some students were praying. Some were still reading notes. The invigilator came in and said, "Keep your bags at the front. Only pens and admit cards on the desk." We all obeyed. She walked to the board and wrote, "Time 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Then she distributed the answer sheets. I wrote my name, roll number, subject, and date. Then the question papers were handed out. I took a deep breath. As I received mine, I looked at it. The questions were not too hard. Some were just like I had practiced. I smiled. I felt a little confident. The bell rang. It was time to begin. I picked up my pen and started writing. Chapter 3, the first few lines flowed. I held my pen and looked at the first question. It was an essay. Write about a memorable day in your life. Perfect. I smiled a little. I had practiced this many times. I had written the same topic last week. While preparing with my teacher, I knew exactly what to write. I started with a title, then the first line, then the second. The words came fast. My pen danced on the paper. My hand moved quickly, line after line. My handwriting was neat. My sentences were clear. I felt proud. I was doing well. I glanced around for a second. Everyone was focused. Some students were already flipping pages. Others were still thinking. I stayed calm. I kept writing. My hands were cold, but my heart was steady. My mind was sharp. I felt prepared. For the first time that morning, I felt confident. The room was silent, except for the soft, scratching sounds of pens moving on paper. No one looked up. No one whispered. Everyone was lost in their own paper. I finished the essay and moved to the second question. It was about grammar, fill in the blanks, easy. I had revised this chapter just yesterday. I filled all the answers one by one. No confusion, no doubt. Next came sentence corrections. Then story writing, then letter writing. Everything felt familiar. I didn't rush, but I didn't stop either. I was in a flow. The kind of flow every student dreams of. When your mind and hand work together. Without fear, without stress. After an hour, I paused to stretch my fingers. They were a little stiff. I shook my hand gently and smiled to myself. I had written a lot, and I still had time. The invigilator walked around the room. She stopped near some desks, picked up a few answer sheets, checked the roll numbers. Then she returned to her chair. Chapter 4, a sudden pause in my hand. I turned the page and started the last section. This was a reading comprehension. A short passage followed by questions. I read the passage slowly. It was about a village boy who loved books, but had no money to buy them. I smiled. I answered the questions with care. Then I moved to the final page of my answer sheet. And just then, something strange happened. I was writing a sentence. My fingers pressed the pen, but no ink came out. The pen just stopped. I looked at it confused. I clicked the tip, no ink. I drew a small line on the corner of the page. Nothing. My pen was not writing. My heart skipped a beat. But I didn't panic, not yet. I calmly put the pen down and picked up my second pen. The one I had checked that morning. The one I trusted. I clicked it and started to write. Again, nothing. Now I started to worry. 2 pens, 2 failures, both not working, during an important exam. I sat there completely still. My brain, however, was moving too fast. I looked at the page, then at the pen, then at the page again. The answer was still in my mind, clear and ready. But I couldn't write, my fingers were stiff. My breath was short, my heart was loud in my chest. Chapter 5, Panic in the Silence. I looked around carefully. Everyone else was writing. Heads down, pens moving, focused, fast. I couldn't speak. I didn't want to break the silence. I didn't want anyone to look at me. I felt embarrassed, even though I knew it wasn't my fault. I had brought 2 pens, I had checked both. And still here I was stuck. I looked inside my pencil box, no other pen. I had my pencil, but it was not allowed for writing answers. Only for drawing, only for rough work. Chapter 6. Should I raise my hand? Should I borrow a pen? I remembered the 3rd pen, the black one my father had given me. That was in my bag, which was now at the front of the room. I couldn't get up without permission. Should I raise my hand? The thought came quickly, but I hesitated. What if the invigilator didn't allow me to go to my bag? What if I wasted even more time? I looked toward the front of the room. My bag was placed with others, zipped and out of reach. I raised my hand. The invigilator looked at me. I whispered. My pen stopped. Can I take my backup pen from the bag? She nodded. I stood up, walked to the front, opened my bag, and pulled out the black pen. It was new, unopened. I quickly removed the cap and returned to my seat. I sat down, took a deep breath, and tried to write. The pen wrote, but the ink was too light. I pressed harder. Still light. The invigilator walked over and said, "That ink is not dark enough. The scanner may not read it." Now I was worried. I had no working pen. Time was running out. I looked around. Everyone else was writing. Fast. Focused. I felt helpless. I looked at the student behind me. She was deep in thought, chewing the end of her pen. Should I turn and whisper? Should I make a small hand sign? But again, I didn't move. Then something happened. Chapter 7, A Stranger's Kindness. A hand from the next row slid a pen onto my desk. It was a boy from my class. I didn't even know his name. He didn't say anything. I looked down at the blue pen lying on my desk. It wasn't fancy. The cap was cracked. The ink mark on the side showed it had been used many times. But in that moment, it was the most important pen in the world to me. I held it carefully like a treasure. My hands were still cold, but I had no time to think about that anymore. I had already lost a few minutes. I placed the tip on the answer sheet and began to write. To my surprise, the ink was smooth. It moved on the paper without any problem. I finished the last line of the story writing section with relief. The story was about a cat and a rainstorm. I smiled a little while writing it. It was a silly story, but I had imagined the whole scene in my mind. Then came the letter writing part. The question asked us to write a letter to our school principal. requesting a new library book. I had never done that in real life, but I had practiced such letters during class. I began with "Respected sir," and the words just flowed. Paragraph after paragraph, line after line. The sentences came out clearly, without any effort. I didn't have to stop and think much. Everything I had revised at home the night before was helping me now. I thanked myself silently for working hard during the preparation days. My heart was not racing anymore. I wasn't scared. I wasn't even thinking about the time. I was just writing. My handwriting remained neat, and the grammar in my mind stayed sharp. I felt proud of myself. Every now and then, I looked up at the clock. I still had enough time to complete the paper. The fear of losing time because of the broken pens had gone. I had caught up and I was on track again. I moved to the final section. A short paragraph writing. The topic was "A day without electricity." I laughed in my mind because just last week, we had a power cut for almost 6 hours at home. I remembered how hot and boring that day was. It felt like the topic was made just for me. So I wrote about it. About sweating in the dark, about how my phone battery died, about how my mom used candles in the kitchen, and how we had dinner by candlelight. I even added a small joke at the end, about how my little brother thought the fan would come back if he sang to it. The memory made me smile again. I could see some students around me starting to look tired. Some were flipping back through their answers. Some were biting their nails. But I stayed calm. My borrowed pen still worked, and my thoughts were still clear. I had only a few minutes left now. I quickly read through everything I had written. I checked the roll number, the page numbers, and even the margins. I saw one small spelling mistake in the third paragraph. I gently scratched it out and rewrote the word. Just then the invigilator said, "5 minutes left." I nodded to myself. I was ready. I used those last 5 minutes to underline the headings, recheck the letter format, and make sure everything looked clean and complete. I was not rushing anymore. I was careful and calm. When the final bell rang, I put down the pen, leaned back in my chair, and took the deepest breath of the day. I had done it. The pen had stopped. I looked the next row. The boy who had given me the pen was still writing. I didn't disturb him. I would thank him properly later. But inside, I felt something very special. Not just relief, but also gratitude. And a little bit of quiet joy. Chapter 8, Lessons Beyond the Test. After the final bell rang, the invigilator came around and collected all the answer sheets. I handed mine over and gave a small smile. My body felt tired, but my mind was light. I had finished everything. I had done my best. The boy who had given me the pen stood up from his seat. We both walked out of the room at the same time. I turned to him and said, "Thank you, you saved my exam." He looked at me, smiled, and simply said, "No problem." I didn't know his name. I had seen him in the hallways before, but we had never spoken. After the exam, I walked home slowly. The sun was bright now, but I didn't mind the heat. My thoughts were full of the questions I had answered. I knew some mistakes might be there, but overall I was proud. When I reached home, my mom opened the door. She looked at my face and asked, "How was it?" I nodded and said, "Good." My pen stopped in the middle, but someone helped me. She looked surprised. What do you mean, both pens? Yes, I said, smiling. Both stopped. One didn't write, the other was too light. She shook her head and said, That's why I always say, test your pens twice. I laughed and said, I did. I told her about the boy and the borrowed pen. She listened carefully and said, Always remember him. A kind heart is more valuable than a sharp brain. That evening I sat in my room, holding the pen the boy had given me. It was still working. I tried writing a few lines on a blank paper. Smooth as butter, I wrote my name. Then I wrote, Thank you. The exams were over, but we had to go to school after a few days. I packed 4 pens this time, 4. I didn't want to take any risk again. I reached in the class early, found my seat and looked around. And then I saw him, the boy who had helped me. He was sitting 2 rows behind me this time. Before the exam started, I walked to him, held out a brand new pen, and said, This is for you. Not because you need it, but because you helped me when I did. He smiled and took it. He said, Now we are even. I smiled back and walked to my seat. That day I realized something. Exams are not just about marks or memory. Sometimes they are about moments. Moments that pause you. Moments that test your calm, your kindness, and your courage. It taught me about kindness. It taught me about being aware of others. It taught me how one person's silent help can change someone's entire experience. That day changed something in me. I became more aware, more kind, more open. And all because my pen stopped during an exam.